what kind of questions arose for the US? What kind of economic challenges? Because that's very different from India. I suppose. I don't know actually, but I would
But
suppose that's very different.
I mean, this is maybe a little bit of a crazy thing to say, but I would say it's actually surprisingly similar in terms of in that
Really?
there is inequality everywhere too,
Mm.
um, and it is more chaotic, right? So I guess for you and I, if we are comparing things to the Netherlands, both in India, I was seeing sort of things being a lot more stark and chaotic than I was used to. And then I thought in the US, the culture shock would be less. I thought, oh, US is another Western country. It's going to be pretty straightforward. But actually, I found that that too was very different from what I was used to in Europe. There is a lot of poverty in the US. I think sometimes, especially in my circles in the Netherlands, that kind of gets forgotten because we see the iPhones and MTV and whatever you watch on TV is kind of the sort of innovation and
You
maybe
hear
also
about the American dream.
yeah exactly. And you see some of the crazy stuff. People zoom in on Trump and such, but they don't really zoom in on the guy who lives in a little shack in the countryside where there isn't a grocery store within a 20-minute driving radius. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of sort of forgotten places that we don't see on TV.
So, what kind of economic questions did that pop up for you?
That, yeah, a lot of questions around how do we go about sort of taking that forward, because it feeds into the conversation around politics too, right? A lot of the people who voted for Trump, you can identify pretty closely, are people from these kind of forgotten areas that have been ignored in broad policy making, especially been ignored by the Democratic Party. So they felt like nobody was really looking out for them. It tends to be blue collar workers, or people who actually do physical labor that is very much necessary. They move things around the country, they repair stuff, they build roads, and we all rely on it, and yet there's very little respect for them. And they feel that, and they feel it especially from the top, from the elected politicians. What can you do about that? So there's a lot of conversation now about it's only going to get worse with the future of work becoming more and more capital intensive and less labor intensive. So these kind of physical jobs, they're already almost gone, but they're going to basically be non-existent. And what do we do with all these people? They wouldn't feel comfortable just moving to Chicago or moving to LA and suddenly becoming a developer. It's not who they are. So those are a lot of the questions that slowly bubbled up for me, but that are still going around my head now, and I think are a big part of conversations now. I guess my master's allowed me to dig into that a little bit. I've always been fascinated by the proposal of the job guarantee, which is a policy solution that is sometimes compared to the basic income solution. So instead of giving people, say, $1,000 a month to account for their basic needs, the job guarantee suggests you offer people a job in case they don't have one. So it's basically saying that whoever wants to work and is able to work, right? If you are disabled, then you should still be getting $1,000 a month or some other kind of provisioning. But if you're willing to work and you're able to work, and there isn't work, but there is actually all these things that need to be done. Like, we need to clean up our riverbeds, we need to build more parks, we need to plant trees, we need to care for the elderly, we need to care for children. All these things are there. They're like blatant needs, but they're not always very profitable, or they're currently not being taken up by corporations. So in the US, what could be done um, more feasibly than most people realize is that the government could step in to help non-governmental organizations or nonprofits direct those kinds of jobs. The government could pay the wages so that whoever's out of work, right, whoever just got fired from McDonald's and is not yet hired by Walmart, in the meantime, they can go plant some trees. And that solves so many issues, because it also tends to be that when people are unemployed, they only lose skill and they lose hope and they lose a sense of self. And if you can catch them, in that very vulnerable position, you can actually help them build skill and regain purpose. And maybe the next job that they would find in the private sector might be a better one than the one they just got laid off from. So that's something that my professors at the Levy Institute are always looking into a lot, and that's what I found to be very interesting.